When you choose silence over chaos, you step into power. Carl Jung, in a world that screams for your attention, the most revolutionary act is to close your eyes and listen to the whisper of your soul. There comes a moment in every human life when the noise becomes unbearable, when the chaos of external demands, the endless chatter of anxiety, and the relentless pursuit of validation finally overwhelms the delicate vessel of your being. It is in this moment of profound exhaustion that you are offered a choice that will determine not just your immediate peace, but the entire trajectory of your spiritual evolution. You can continue to dance with the chaos, letting it pull you deeper into its frantic rhythm, or you can do something that the world will call madness, but your soul will recognize as the deepest wisdom. You can choose silence. Carl Jung understood this sacred crossroads better than perhaps any other explorer of the human psyche. He saw that in our modern world, we have become so addicted to noise, external and internal, that we have forgotten the profound power that lies dormant in the quiet spaces of our existence. When Jung spoke of choosing silence over chaos, he was not advocating for passive withdrawal from life. He was pointing towards something far more radical, the conscious decision to step into your own authority, to reclaim the sovereignty of your inner world, and to discover the transformative power that emerges when you stop running from yourself. Silence, in Jung's understanding, is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of truth. It is the space where your authentic self can finally emerge from beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear that have accumulated over years of living in a world that rewards performance over presence. Think about the last time you sat in complete silence. Not the silence of sleep, but the conscious silence of awareness. When was the last time you allowed yourself to simply be, without agenda, without distraction, without the need to prove anything to anyone, including yourself? For most of us, this question reveals a troubling truth. We have become strangers to our own silence. We fill every moment with noise, music, podcasts, conversations, thoughts, worries, plans. We have become so afraid of what we might discover in the quiet that we have made noise our religion and busyness our God. Jung recognized that our attraction to chaos is not accidental. It serves a psychological function. It keeps us from having to face the deeper questions of our existence. As long as we are caught in the whirlwind of external drama, we can avoid the more challenging work of inner transformation. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart, Jung wrote. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. But looking inside requires courage. It requires the willingness to sit with parts of yourself that you have spent years trying to avoid. It requires facing what Jung called the shadow, those aspects of your personality that you have deemed unacceptable and pushed into the darkness of your unconscious. Chaos becomes a refuge because it is easier to be angry at the world than to be honest about your own pain. It is easier to blame external circumstances than to take responsibility for your internal responses. It is easier to stay busy than to be still. Yet this very avoidance is what keeps you trapped in cycles of suffering. The chaos you think is happening to you is often the chaos you are unconsciously creating to avoid the deeper work of healing and integration. When Jung speaks of stepping into power through silence, he is describing a fundamental shift in how you relate to life itself. Most people understand power as the ability to control external circumstances, to make things happen, to influence others, to achieve desired outcomes. But Jung recognized a deeper truth. The greatest power is the power over your own inner world. It is the ability to remain centered in the midst of external storms. It is the capacity to respond rather than react. It is the wisdom to know when to engage and when to withdraw. This kind of power cannot be taken from you because it does not depend on external validation or circumstances. It emerges from your relationship with your own depths, from your willingness to befriend the totality of who you are. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, Jung observed. But this understanding only comes when we create space for reflection, when we choose the inner work over the outer drama. There is a sacred tradition found in every wisdom culture of periodically withdrawing from the world to reconnect with deeper truths. Jesus went into the desert. Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree. Muhammad retreated to the cave of Hira. Jung himself retreated to his tower at Bollingen, where he could reconnect with the deeper currents of his psyche. These were not escapes from life, but preparations for a more authentic engagement with life. They were recognitions that the soul needs space to breathe, to integrate, to remember what is truly important. In our hyperconnected world, this practice of conscious withdrawal has become more necessary than ever. We are constantly bombarded with information, opinions, and demands for our attention. Our nervous systems are in a state of chronic activation, our minds are fragmented by multitasking, and our souls are starving for the nourishment that only comes from silence and solitude. When you choose silence over chaos, you are not abandoning your responsibilities. You are ensuring that when you do engage with the world, you do so from a place of centeredness rather than reactivity, from wisdom rather than fear, from love rather than need. In the laboratory of silence, something profound begins to happen. The scattered fragments of your psyche begin to settle, like sediment in still water. The constant chatter of your mind begins to quiet, and underneath it, you begin to hear something you may have forgotten existed, the voice of your deeper wisdom. Jung called this process individuation, the gradual integration of conscious and unconscious content that leads to psychological wholeness. But individuation cannot happen in the midst of chaos. It requires the container of silence, the sacred space where your authentic self can emerge. In silence, you begin to distinguish between what is yours and what belongs to others. You begin to separate your authentic desires from the expectations that have been placed upon you. You begin to understand the difference between who you think you should be and who you actually are. This is not always comfortable. In fact, it can be profoundly unsettling. When the noise stops, you may initially feel anxious, restless, or even afraid. This is normal. Your psyche has become addicted to stimulation, and like any withdrawal process, there will be discomfort as you readjust to a different way of being. But if you can stay with the discomfort, if you can resist the urge to immediately fill the silence with distraction, something beautiful begins to emerge. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who you should be. Jung understood that true transformation requires what he called shadow work, the courageous process of acknowledging and integrating the parts of yourself that you have rejected or denied. Chaos often serves as a distraction from this essential work, keeping you focused on external dramas rather than internal healing. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. In the sanctuary of silence, you create space for this darkness to emerge safely. Without the constant stimulation of external chaos, the repressed aspects of your psyche begin to surface, seeking acknowledgement and integration. This might manifest as unexpected emotions, forgotten memories, or uncomfortable truths about yourself that you have been avoiding. Rather than pushing these experiences away or immediately jumping back into distraction, silence gives you the opportunity to meet them with compassion and curiosity. You begin to understand that your anger might be protecting a deep vulnerability. Your anxiety might be highlighting values that are important to you. Your sadness might be honoring losses that you have never properly grieved. In the gentle container of silence, these shadow aspects transform from enemies to be defeated into allies to be understood. They become sources of information about your deeper needs, your unhealed wounds, and your unlived potential. Here lies one of the great paradoxes that Jung understood so well. By withdrawing from the chaos of the world, you actually become more capable of engaging with it meaningfully. By choosing silence over noise, you develop the discernment to know when your voice is truly needed. So many of us exhaust ourselves by responding to every demand, every crisis, every drama that presents itself. We mistake reactivity for engagement, busyness for importance, and constant availability for love. But Jung recognized that this kind of scattered energy serves no one well. When you are pulled in every direction, you have nothing substantial to offer in any direction. When you react from a place of depletion, your responses often create more chaos, rather than bringing clarity or healing. The person who has learned to choose silence over chaos becomes a different kind of presence in the world. They speak less, but their words carry more weight. They engage selectively, but their engagement is more meaningful. They offer their energy more carefully, but their contribution is more substantial. In the practice of silence, you develop what Jung would recognize as one of the most important skills for psychological and spiritual development, the ability to listen deeply. Not just to the words that others speak, but to the unspoken needs, fears, and longings that lie beneath the surface. Most of us listen with the goal of formulating our response. We are so busy preparing what we will say next that we miss the deeper communication that is taking place. We hear the content, but we miss the context. We respond to the words, but we ignore the soul that is speaking. When you have made friends with silence, you begin to listen differently. You listen not just with your ears, but with your entire being. You create space for others to reveal themselves more fully, because you are not rushing to fill every pause with your own words or insights. This kind of listening is itself a form of healing presence. When someone feels truly heard, not judged, not fixed, not advised, but simply witnessed with compassion and understanding, something in them relaxes. They remember that they are not alone in their struggles, that their experience has value, that their pain deserves acknowledgement. Jung understood that healing happens not through the elimination of suffering, but through the compassionate witnessing of it. And this witnessing can only happen when we create space for it, space that emerges naturally from our own practice of silence and inner attunement. What Jung recognized, and what every wisdom tradition has understood in its own way, is that choosing silence over chaos initiates a process of death and rebirth. The person who emerges from deep silence is not the same person who entered it. The old identity, the one built on external validation, constant activity, and reactive patterns, begins to dissolve. This can feel frightening because we have mistaken this constructed self for our true identity. We fear that without our familiar patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, we will disappear entirely. But what Jung discovered, both in his own journey and in his work with countless others, is that what dies in the silence is not your true self, but the false constructions that have been obscuring it. What emerges is not a new person, but the person you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and adaptation. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it, Jung wrote. The same could be said for peace, joy, wisdom, and every other quality that represents your authentic nature. Silence becomes the sacred laboratory where these barriers are identified, understood, and gradually dissolved. Not through force or effort, but through the gentle alchemy of awareness and acceptance. One of the greatest challenges in this process is learning how to integrate your experiences of silence with your engagement in the world. It is one thing to find peace in meditation or solitude. It is another thing entirely to maintain that centeredness when you return to the demands of daily life. Jung understood this challenge intimately. He recognized that the goal is not to remain permanently withdrawn from life, but to develop the ability to move fluidly between engagement and withdrawal, between speaking and listening, between action and reflection. This requires what he called holding the tension of opposites, the capacity to remain centered while participating fully in life. It means learning to be in the world without being consumed by it, to care deeply without becoming attached to outcomes, to engage passionately without losing your inner equilibrium. This is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of choosing silence over chaos. It is not a one-time choice, but a moment-to-moment practice of returning to your center whenever you notice that you have been pulled into reactivity or overwhelm. You begin to recognize the early warning signs, the tightness in your chest, the acceleration of your thoughts, the urge to immediately respond to every stimulus. These become invitations to pause, to breathe, to reconnect with the silence that is always available within you. Jung also understood that this personal work of choosing silence over chaos has profound implications for the collective. When individuals learn to respond rather than react, when they engage from centeredness rather than chaos, they contribute to the healing of the whole human family. We are living in a time of unprecedented global chaos, environmental crisis, political polarization, social fragmentation. It can feel overwhelming to consider how your personal choice for silence could possibly matter in the face of such massive challenges. But Jung recognized that all collective transformation begins with individual transformation. When you refuse to participate in the collective hysteria, when you choose to respond with wisdom rather than react with fear, you create a field of possibility that others can attune to. Your silence becomes a form of activism, not the passive withdrawal that abandons responsibility, but the conscious cultivation of the inner resources necessary for effective and sustainable engagement with the world's challenges. At its deepest level, choosing silence over chaos is a spiritual practice. It is a recognition that beneath the surface turbulence of life, there exists a profound stillness that is not disturbed by external circumstances. Jung, despite his scientific training, was fundamentally a spiritual explorer. He understood that the psyche has depths that cannot be fully mapped by rational analysis alone. He recognized that in the deepest silence, we encounter something that transcends our individual psychology, a universal wisdom, a collective consciousness, a divine presence that speaks in the language of symbol, synchronicity, and direct knowing. God is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful path violently and recklessly, all things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or worse, Jung wrote. In silence, we become available to these deeper currents of guidance and wisdom. We begin to sense that our individual lives are part of a larger pattern, a greater unfolding that we can participate in consciously when we are not caught in the chaos of our own reactivity. This does not require adherence to any particular religious tradition. It simply requires the humility to recognize that your individual consciousness is part of something much larger, and the wisdom to create space for that larger intelligence to inform your choices and actions. The ultimate test of your practice, of choosing silence over chaos, comes when you return to engagement with the world. Do you bring the wisdom you have cultivated in silence into your relationships, your work, your creative expression? Or do you immediately fall back into old patterns of reactivity and overwhelm? Jung understood that this return to the world is not a falling back into unconsciousness, but the completion of the cycle of transformation. You withdraw to reconnect with your depths, and you return to share the gifts of that reconnection. When you have truly learned to choose silence over chaos, your presence in the world becomes different. You speak when you have something meaningful to contribute rather than speaking to fill space or prove your worth. You act from clear intention rather than compulsive reaction. You offer your gifts generously, but without attachment to how they are received. You become what Jung would call individuated, not separate from others, but authentically yourself in relationship with others. You no longer need the world to be different than it is in order for you to be at peace, but you engage with it fully because you choose to, not because you have to. Choosing silence over chaos is not a destination, but a way of traveling. It is a practice that deepens and evolves throughout your entire life. Each time you choose the inner work over external drama, each time you pause before reacting, each time you return to your center when you notice you have been pulled into chaos, you strengthen this capacity. There will be times when you forget. There will be situations that trigger your old patterns so powerfully that you find yourself caught in reactivity before you even realize what has happened. This is not failure. It is part of the human experience. Jung understood that the path of individuation is not linear. It involves cycles of integration and disintegration, periods of clarity and confusion, times of expansion and contraction. What matters is not perfection, but the commitment to continue returning to the practice, to keep choosing the deeper wisdom over the surface chaos. Each return to silence after a period of chaos deepens your capacity. Each time you choose reflection over reaction, you strengthen the neural pathways that support conscious response. Each moment of centeredness becomes a foundation for the next moment of choice. As you deepen in this practice, you begin to notice its effects extending far beyond your personal experience. Your family members begin to comment on your increased calmness. Your colleagues notice that you bring a different quality of presence to meetings and interactions. Your friends seek you out when they need someone who can listen without trying to fix or judge. You begin to understand that your choice for silence over chaos is not just personal healing, it is a gift to everyone whose life you touch. When you are not caught in reactive patterns, you create space for others to step out of their reactivity as well. Your relationships deepen because you are present rather than performing. Your work becomes more effective because you are responding to what is actually needed rather than what your anxiety thinks is needed. Your creative expression becomes more authentic because it emerges from silence rather than noise. Jung recognized this ripple effect as evidence of what he called the collective unconscious, the deep interconnectedness that exists beneath the surface of individual consciousness. When you heal something within yourself, you contribute to the healing of the whole. In every moment, you're faced with the choice that Jung illuminated so clearly. Will you choose silence or chaos? Will you respond from your depths or react from your surface? Will you step into your power or give it away to circumstances beyond your control? This choice is sacred because it determines not just your immediate experience, but the trajectory of your entire life. Each time you choose silence over chaos, you move closer to becoming who you actually are beneath all the conditioning and adaptation. Each time you choose centeredness over reactivity, you reclaim another piece of your authentic power. The world will continue to offer you countless invitations to chaos. The news will continue to broadcast crisis and urgency. Social media will continue to demand your immediate response to every opinion and outrage. Your own mind will continue to generate worries, plans, and judgments that feel urgent and important. But beneath all of this noise, the silence is always waiting. It is not empty or void. It is full of presence, wisdom, and peace. It is the space where your true self resides, where your deepest knowing emerges, where your authentic power is sourced. Jung spent his entire career exploring the depths of human consciousness, and what he discovered there was both humbling and empowering. He found that within each person lies the capacity for profound transformation, deep wisdom, and authentic peace. But these qualities cannot be forced or demanded. They can only be discovered through the patient practice of turning inward, of choosing silence over chaos, of befriending the totality of who you are. The journey he mapped is not easy, but it is the most worthwhile journey you will ever undertake. It is the journey from unconscious reactivity to conscious response, from external validation to inner authority, from surface chaos to deep peace. Every time you choose silence over chaos, you honor the deepest truth that Jung discovered, that within you lies everything you need for healing, growth, and transformation. You do not need to be fixed by someone else or saved by external circumstances. You need only to create space for your own wisdom to emerge, your own healing to unfold, your own authentic self to be revealed. As Jung himself wrote in one of his most profound observations, the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But becoming who you are requires the courage to step away from who you think you should be, to choose the inner journey over external validation, to trust the wisdom of silence over the seduction of chaos. This is your invitation. This is your moment. This is your choice. Choose silence. Step into your power. Become who you truly are. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. If this reflection spoke to your soul, subscribe. You are not alone. The journey is just beginning.